Hi, welcome. So today we're talking about the pentatonic scale, but we're going to do it very, very slow, especially if this is new to you, just because it's such an important concept, like all the things that we do in our live streams. But this is a very, very helpful skill to know how to do, to understand what the pentatonic scale is and how to apply it to song work. It's a key aspect for a lot of improvisation and a lot of riffs and runs that we find throughout many different genres. So we're going to break it down really slow and just make sure that we really understand it uh, it's because the pattern only has 5 notes, and we'll talk about why, and that's kind of where it gets its name, the pentatonic scale. It actually can get kind of disorienting where you are in that pattern. And so when you just jump into a lot of like more advanced pentatonic scales, like the particular kind of practice that you're going to do with like certain runs and riffs, you can get just like easily thrown off if you don't know the lay of the land and the ground rules. So that's what this is all about. So please feel free to ask questions. Again, we're going to just be really slow and thorough about it so we truly understand what's going on here. And then once you get that sort of foundation for pentatonic scales, it's just a really, really helpful skill to have, and can be very, very fun. It's important to note that a lot of like older music, like indigenous music and things like that, there's actually a high usage of pentatonic scales. So it does come kind of naturally too. Whereas like certain kinds of scales, you actually kind of have to think really, really specific about, and they're maybe a little less natural than the pentatonic scale. So there is like a history of that too. So I recommend, like, uh, if you're someone who's not familiar with music theory, when we break things down, you can also just keep trying to sing the scales and try the patterns with me, and you'll start to understand it by feeling as well. So let's dive into it. So if you've been following my other live lessons, we just did a whole thing on theory and we talked about scales, right? So what is a scale? But it's a set of notes that we use for our melodies. And they also often define what chords that we have. Um, and so there's lots of different kinds of scales. And when we talk about like a key, like for example, being in the key of C, it means that I'm building a scale starting from C, and C being my one, and then going from there. So I like to use numbers. I think that's a really fast and intuitive way to figure out the order of your scale degrees and sort of where they are and what purpose they serve. We can also use solfege. So if you're familiar with like, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, I'm doing the same exact thing, but I'm just putting numbers instead of solfege with it, because I think that that's actually just a little more accessible to people. So let's dive in. So our typical scales in Western music generally all have 7 notes, right? And then we repeat to the 8th note. And it's important to note no. But it's important to understand that the octave, or the 8th scale degree, is the same thing as the first note. And this is all review from what I did last week on Theory 101, which is understanding that we use letters to understand pitch class. Things that are an octave apart or double or half the frequency get the same letter name, and that's the repeat of our scale. So for example, if I'm doing a C major scale, I'm going one, starting on C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. By the time I get to 8, I'm actually back at a C again. And if you look at a piano, you'll see that the pattern starts to repeat at that point. So I actually like to think of 8 as just 1. So I could keep going, right? I could be like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. You can just keep going on forever in either direction. And that's really the concept of our scales. Now, the major scale has 7 notes, and a pentatonic scale has 5 notes. So you want to think of it as just less options, and it's actually the same, more or less the same notes as our major scale, but we're just taking away 2 of those scale degrees. So we have some wider gaps between some of the intervals, in our pattern, and that's what we have to keep track of. And actually, strangely enough, you might think, well, 5 notes, that's easier. With music, sometimes when we have gaps, that actually makes it harder and it's more likely to fall out of tune for some people. So we want to keep track of those larger leaps and understand them. So let's just quickly review the major scale, and that's going to really help us understand the pentatonic scale. And then we've got to just do some exercises to feel it out. And I'll talk about sort of later on why the pentatonic scale is so useful and how we can apply it to things. So that's going to be where I think everything starts to really come together. So first off, we just have to understand the features of our major scale. So we've got whole steps and half steps are the intervals that go from one scale degree to the next for most 7-note scales. Whereas when we start to add in, when we start to use the pentatonic scale and we take away some of those notes, then we have some larger intervals. But for now, just whole steps and half steps. So when we go from 1 to 2, 1, 2, that's a whole step, meaning that there's a half step in between those. So if we got like 1, 1.5, 2, so 1, 2. Same thing for 3. 2 to 3. There's actually a spot in between there. 3, 2, 2.5, 3. And if you followed me from last week, we often give these terms, these intervals and these spots in the scale, major and minor titles, and it just really means lower or higher. So if I'm going like 1, minor 2, major 2, it's just that there's this lower option for a second scale degree for other scales and things like that. So don't get too lost in that, but it's good to keep track of all of these spaces in between because that's going to help us really understand how to construct our pentatonic scale. So again, 1 to major 2, it's a whole step. 2 to 3 is also a whole step. So we've got 2, minor 3, major 3. Now here's one of the main features of our major scale. 3 to 4 is a half step. And you'll see this actually on the piano. I'm doing the C major scale right now because it's really nice visually if you're looking at a keyboard. If you don't have a piano, you can always use an online keyboard to see this. But there's no black note in between 3 and 4, in this case, E and F. And so that's one of the main features of our major scale. So we've got first note, whole step, half step, and then from 4 to 5, whole step. So that means that there's a spot in between there, right? 4, 4.5, 5. And then we go from 5 to 6 is also a whole step. So we've got 5, minor 6, 6. And then same thing from 6 to 7. 6, minor 7, major 7. So we have 6, 7. And then the last feature of our major scale that's really important is there's a half step between 7 and returning back to 1 or 8, right? So 7, 8. We often call this major 7 the leading tone because it feels like it brings us right back to 1 again, or back to our tonic, the note that defines the key that we're in. So in this case, it's C. And we've got 7, 8. And it's like we've come back home again, right? So altogether, our major scale is 1, 2, 3, 4, half step right there. 5, 6, 7, 8, and a half step right there. So the half steps are between 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. And you'll see why this is really important when we start to understand the pentatonic scale. So that's our typical major scale. Now, when we do a pentatonic scale, we're taking out 2 of these notes, and we're actually taking out the notes that create that half step motion, because that really defines what we hear in that sort of major scale. So we're taking out 4 and we're taking out 7, and that creates some gaps. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we go 1, 2, 3, 5. And we'll talk about how do we keep track of that space. If you practice your major scale, learning the pentatonic scale is actually really not so bad. It's just sort of like another step. And again, it might seem like, well, learning the pentatonic scale might be easier because there's 5 notes. When we have more spaces, it's easier for us to drift out of tune or more leaps. And so actually understanding the major scale is a really good way to get used to the pentatonic scale. So start with the major scale. So again, we have 1, 2, 3, 5, and we're skipping 4. And then we go 6, and we skip 7, 8. We actually go 6, 8. So altogether, the pentatonic scale is 1, 2, 3, 5, 6. And those are actually the 5 notes of it, and then it repeats. Back to 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and then just keeps going. So that's really what's hard about this, is actually just keeping track of where the gaps are. So mind the gap. Now, what is that actual gap and what is that interval? It's a little different from our typical whole steps and half steps. We actually have, if you think about it, right, from 3, if we're skipping 4, there's a half step between 3 and 4, and then to get from 4 to 5 is a whole step. So it's like a little math game. We actually have a minor third, which is a whole step plus a half step. So when we go 3, 5, that's actually a minor third distance. And you might be like, well, why is that helpful to me? I like to think about my chromatic scale or every single little step in between, because that's going to help me make sure that I'm just perfectly in tune, especially if you're learning this for the first time. So think about like 3, 4, 1/2 step right there. 4 to 4.5, also known as the tritone sometimes. 4.5 to 5. So if you think about that, there's 1/2 step, 2 half steps, 3 half steps, and that's that minor third interval. So 3, 5, 3, 5. This is actually also this interval going from 5 to 3. We call the millennial whoop, right? So yay, we get a name for something. It's that like whoa. So it's actually kind of in our ear a lot. So just trying to remember this, right? From 3 to 4 is a half step, and from 4 to 5 is a whole step. If we skip 4, that means that we actually have to that those intervals are still there, and it becomes this wider interval, right? A minor third. So 1, 2, 3, 5, and then we keep going. 5, 6, and then same thing here. Because we have that half step between 7 and 8, and we have a whole step between 6 and 7, that's also a minor third. So the pentatonic scale has 2 minor third gaps in it, and that's really what makes it sound like what it is. So again, we have 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 6 to 8, 6. Right, so again, I'll go through these half steps, right? We've got 6, there's a half step, another half step to 7, and then 7 to 8. Now, if we take out 7, da, 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 we get that interval. So these are minor thirds. So the whole pentatonic pattern in C is 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. That's the lay of the land. Now, when we do it kind of like linear like this from C to C, it has a particular sound. It's like, that's all right. But it's when we start doing some other things where it starts to be really cool. And then you're like, oh, I've heard that like all over the place, right? And that's kind of what we're leading to. But it's good to do it sort of in this linear way if you're new to all of this, just so you really keep track of these patterns. So again, we're going 1, 2, 3, and then we're skipping a minor third to 5, or you can just think of it as skipping 4, right? 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and then we're skipping right here. 6, 8, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. So once you know that, just do a regular syllable, because sometimes like singing with numbers is a little awkward. It doesn't, the number shapes kind of feel a little weird. So instead, just go like na 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 na. Now that gets harder because all of a sudden you have to think the numbers in your head. Otherwise, you might forget where the gap is, and then you can get kind of disoriented. So as I'm doing this, na na na, in my head, I'm kind of audiating 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. So na 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 na. And that's our pattern. So that's the first thing that you want to get used to. And please, again, ask questions if you're confused about how this is all formed. Now, the next step, once we know our pattern, is to understand that it doesn't always just go from 1 to 8. In fact, we often have 1 in the middle, and we go from 5 to 5 on either side. So this is kind of, I think, the most useful pattern to think about. So I'm going to move to a new key here. I'm going to move to F. So now this is my 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. So I've got going that way, but I could also go 1, 6, 5, 6, 1. So I'm going to think of 1 in the middle, and then think about my ability to go in either direction to 5 or sometimes to 6 on the top end is really nice too. So this type is like this. Well, actually, let's start it from 5. So we'll go like 5, 6, 1. Remember, it's always between 6 and 1. We take out that 7. So 5, 6, 1, 1, 2, 3. And then we take out 4 here. 3, 5, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5. 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5. So you can see if you didn't learn the first part and understand what the pentatonic scale is, you might get really disoriented actually by doing this where all of a sudden 1's in the middle and you're oscillating around. And you'll see how this all starts to come together. So why is the pentatonic scale so useful? Because when we have less scale degrees, it's more ambiguous. So because it's more ambiguous and we don't have those clear changes from 3 to 4, that half step change, and basically we just have whole steps and then those minor third gaps. Because we do that, it actually can just fit into a lot of different situations really easily. And so this actually makes it a really popular thing for learning to do riffs. And it's important to note that you can, not in every case, but you can often just add a pentatonic pattern to any major scale thing that you're doing, especially if it's in contemporary music. It's important to note that, okay, where do we find pentatonic scales a lot? And where do we find them like in the melodies where like, so the word diatonic just means that I'm doing the regular scales of 7 notes. Where do we find types of genres where the diatonic sometimes can sound weird, or just the regular scales? It kind of makes it sound more classical or out of genre. These are going to be often, as I said, like old school, like traditional indigenous kinds of music in a lot of cultures, not always, but in many cultures. We're also going to find it in country music, like all over the place. So if you're a country music fan, like get the pentatonic scale down. It doesn't mean that we don't have diatonics, but a lot of the melodies are based off of pentatonic scales. And then at like a change of a section, they'll add in one of those, like the 4 or the 7, and it gives it this kind of new flavor to it. So you think of it, it's like that like square rectangle thing, right? Like like a pentatonic pattern can fit into any sort of thing where you're using just all the scale degrees. And sometimes it's just little passages that are purely that sort of pentatonic sound because we like that sound. So again, like indigenous style music, folk music sometimes can be a mix of both. Same thing with country. And then certainly blues is where we have like a ton of pentatonic. And that's where like sometimes the other notes don't sound so good, the other scale degrees. Again, just depends, but like typically that tends to be the case. And so, yeah, we've got blues. If you're thinking country and blues, then the next step is thinking about rock music. We tend to have a lot of pentatonic patterns in rock music. And then thinking about contemporary music, what is that? It's an amalgamation of all these styles a lot of the time. And so it's found in like all of our pop contemporary music. And so just remember that it's not like because I'm singing pentatonic, it means that I can't do diatonic notes. You have to play it by ear and see like, does that sound weird or out of style? And sometimes it's the case that the fourth scale degree and the seventh scale degree just make it sound like out of style. So that's kind of the concept here, is actually these pentatonic patterns work really well for moments of improvisation. And so it's kind of like a precursor to riffs and runs. Now we can do riffs and runs that are diatonic, but people tend to like the sensation of doing these pentatonic runs. So let's start to do them now that we know the pentatonic scale a little bit more. And I'm sticking to major right now. We'll talk about sort of the option of the minor pentatonic, but that sometimes I can see confuses people if you're new to it. So we're starting from a beginner standpoint, but just know that the pentatonic scale works for major and minor. So that also feeds into this concept of it being ambiguous and easily fitting between these different kinds of sounds. And in that way, it's just actually less likely to conflict with the sound of whatever you're doing with your music. So it's easy to add improvisation. So we're in F here, just getting used to this again. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. And I picked this one for my voice because I can drop down to 1, 6, 5, 6, 1. So, if you're a higher voice singer or a lower voice singer for me, you can pick a lower scale or a lower key and do this from there. But think about saving some room on the bottom side, because you'll sometimes get these 3-note runs or little riffs, like end note riffs are very, very common. And you can often just plug them into songs that you're doing to add a little extra flavor and style, and just finesse, right? Because it shows off your agility, right? So we've got 1, 6, 5, 6, 1. Now just do it on a nice syllable like no, no, right? And you can think of sort of slingshotting back, or you can just go no, yeah, and just kind of dropping off of it. So if you've got a melody and you're going like no, 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 and you can do that little no or no. That's a really nice little run that you can do and just come right back to the same note, or just let it continue off. So this one's not so bad. Now the other one is like the most common run, and this works for diatonic and pentatonic because it's the same. When we go 3, 2, 1, so no, 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 no. Right. So this is like a really, really popular kind of pattern that we can do. Think about these two parts, right? 3, 2, 1, and then 1, 6, 5. So you could just go from 3 all the way down to 5 and be like, no. So we call that like a 5-note run, right? 3, 2, 1, 6, 5, because we're essentially going through all of the notes of the pentatonic scale just really quickly, right? So no, yeah, yeah, yeah. You can just kind of play around with this. So once you know the pattern, I recommend just try to see if you can like move around from spot to spot and be playful with it. And then we can do some particular kinds of drills that are a little more challenging, because, when you start doing some of these in-between spots, you can get confused as to where the gap is, right? Like, is it one note and then a gap, or is it 2 notes and then a gap? And this is where we start to get kind of disoriented by the pentatonic scale. And just being familiar with this is really, really helpful if you're doing any riffs and runs, because then like, what are your main spots that you're looking at, right? So think of like 1, 1, 3, 1, 5, right? These are just our regular, or 1, 3, 5, 3, 1, right? These are our anchors, and we often get thrown off when we do 6 and 2. So these are the in-between notes in our chords, and that's what you kind of want to think about, is aim for targets like 5, 1, or 3. And so wherever you're starting, if I'm starting on 3, my target might be down to 5. So na, na, na. Maybe it's going from 5 to 1. Na, na. And then we do this thing called like the slingshot, or at least that's the name that I give it, which is your ability to start on a note and then go up and then all the way back and then start where you or end where you started, right? So if I'm like na na hey, right? And that can be really useful because you could just throw that in anywhere on a single note and just come right back to the note. So uh, na. Again, this just takes a little bit of time to get used to the fact that I'm putting the gap on the lower side here, right? And I'm not even dealing with the higher gap, right? It's just 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5, 6, 1. So I'm just leaving out 7, right? And that's working this one. The other side is thinking about doing like simple 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2, 1. No. Right. So if you're going up to the 5, you can do the same thing and just come right back down. So this is how we start from like 3-note riffs to 5-note riffs to 7-note riffs. It's really just like piecing these together and keeping track of these individual components of like groups of 3 notes, and then thinking about sort of adding those groups of 3 notes together, right? So we've got like 1, 6, 5, 6, 1. There's like a pocket of 3 notes. 3, 2, 1, 2, 3. There's a pocket of 3 notes. And then I could go 6, 5, 3. That's a really good one too. Now notice when I do 6, 5, 3, the gap is between 3 and 5, and it's on the lower side. So no, no, and I can just start to do that. And I highly recommend like don't be intimidated by runs. Keep them light. And I will often just like put on a playlist or like shopping in the grocery store, things like that. Right. This is just something I'll say all the time because it's actually a really great way. And like you're just in the like very lightly as you're sort of humming along, you can practice doing this because often it'll fit with like most contemporary things. Right. So no, and you just go through the lay of the land and then ah, 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 ah. So sometimes you can think of like these repeated notes of going like ah, ah, ah. And that's a great way to sort of see these 3 pieces that we can kind of work with, right? 6, 5, 3 is one of them. 3, 2, 1, then 1, 6, 5. And you can go up and down and back and forth, right? So you can go like whoa, 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 and all these combinations in between, right? So whoa, 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 whoa. And you'll just start, sounds like a song, right? All of a sudden. So like that's sort of the typical concept. And I really recommend, again, first try it just from like 1 to 8, get a sense of it like that, and then find a key where you can put 1 in the middle and practice just kind of oscillating back and forth. And that's how we start to learn our pentatonic pattern. And then it just becomes like this kind of feeling based thing, right? Where is the gap? So no, right? There's a gap right there. No, and no. There's that whoa, right? That little minor third thing. No, and we have to kind of be used to that with our voice and be ready to make that jump. Otherwise, we'll get stuck on a diatonic note and it'll feel and sound kind of weird in certain contexts, right? So that's kind of the idea. No, no, and then no, just 3, 2, 1, right? Nice and simple. Then no. So if you're at 1, just know that the gap is right there, right? So da da da. This pattern from 5, 6, 1, you can think of it as there's 2 notes and then a gap. And if you're going up, if you're going down, it's a gap right away, and then 2 notes. Now on the other side of the pattern, it's going to be kind of flipped around, right? So we've got 3 to 5, 6, right? That's going, there's a gap right away. And then if we go the other direction, 6, 5, 3, all of a sudden we have 2 notes and then a gap. So you can see, right? It's like these two shapes, and depending on if you're going up or down, you have to mind that gap. And that's where we can get kind of disoriented. But that's also the power of the pentatonic scale, is if you can keep track of it. For other people, it kind of like, it's like a magic trick. They like feel like you're flicking through all these notes and through your range rather quickly, because of these gaps, and they get kind of a little disoriented by it. So when you add like other things where you're like sliding, re-articulating, doing turnarounds, that's where we start to get a lot of the magic that we see in like every song pretty much. So this is where I start to get to more challenging patterns, which is, can I do these 3-note things? And then what happens if I go up a note and then do another 3-note pattern? And I start to come into these kinds of sequences. This is where it gets kind of hard. So let's practice it. So let's say I'm going to start on the top 6 and go 6, 5, 3, and then 5, 3, 2, 3, 2, 1. So this is a great pattern to practice, just so you're really familiar with where that hole is. So no, 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 yeah. And then you practice doing it in these packets of 3, right? 1. And then you can do it the other way. 1. Right? So you just have to be really like calm and methodical about it, because you might start to do a leap where you shouldn't, right? So 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 5, 3, 5, 6. So even right there, right, we've got no gap first. 1, 2, 3, and then we have 2, 3, 5 that has 2 notes and then a gap. And then all of a sudden, this next pattern, just going up 1 note, 3, 5, 6, we have a gap right away and then 2 notes. So it just constantly flips back and forth depending on what note you're starting with. And this is why, again, riffing can be a little tricky, actually. Even though it's just these 5 notes over and over again, the pattern feels like it keeps shifting just based on where you're starting with your note and how you're doing your sequence. So again, like 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 5, 3, 5, 6, 6, 5, 3, 5, 3, 2, 3, 2, 1. So I recommend practicing this and start it really slow. You might do like staccato practice. This is a great way for accuracy, and go like ha 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 ha. And as you get more and more comfortable, and you can do that kind of a thing. So that's really just how this practice works, and you just have to get more and more familiar with the pentatonic pattern, and then you'll realize that it just repeats over and over and over again. And so if you have a song where you're like, that's a really cool run, chances are it's probably like a pentatonic pattern. Not always, but chances are it's actually not as complicated as you think. So here's this exercise going na 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 na. Now, one thing I recommend, because this gap thing can be so hard if you're not someone who like plays piano, or is visualizing in the same way, is actually you again, you don't have to write this on sheet music, but put these 5 notes and make a little gap. So you go like 1, 2, 3, and I would just do like draw circles like that, right, or it could be on a piece of paper, anything like that. Or I have like a little whiteboard that I use sometimes. Put those first 3 notes, then make a space, right, and then put a note 5, and then put 6, and you can put the numbers by them too, right? Like so like 1, 2, 3 gap, and then 5, 6 gap, right? Or you could put 1 in the middle and do 1 gap, right? 6, 5, and then 1, 2, 3 gap, 5, 6, right? And play around with that, and then try this kind of exercise. So like if you're doing this one in particular, put 1, 2, 3, and then gap, and then 5, 6. And so I would go like no, 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 no. It's hard to show with my hands, but you get the concept, right? It's actually just being aware of where that gap is will help you find the pattern, and actually kind of intuitively for a lot of singers. I'm not taking that for granted, because sometimes it's not as intuitive as people would think until you really get better at pitch matching and these other things. Um, but if you're someone who listens to music and sings along all the time, this is really all you need to do, is be able to visualize the order. That's why the numbers are so helpful. That's why I do that instead of solfege. Solfege is a really, really helpful system. But in this case, actually, I find that when you're just dealing with 5 notes, it's actually more helpful just to use the numbers, so you can keep track of the order and where you are. Because again, music isn't just going from 1 to 8, it's kind of doing everything in between. It's this constant sort of kaleidoscopic shifting thing. And if you're not sure what note you're on, what number you're on, how can you get your body to go through one of these patterns? So that's sort of this game, is once you know that, then if you have a melody, you can start to track out, okay, here's my melody notes. And then for example, I'll use like Amazing Grace, because this is a public domain song, readily works with the pentatonic pattern. The first part of it, I mean, the pattern is pretty much for the pentatonic anyway. So it's Ame or Ame, right? But right there, I can go 5, 6, 1. We almost hear that as just that's the melody, right? Amazing grace, amazing grace. I can go like how sweet. So if I've just got like how sweet, I can fit all of these notes in between if I just know where I am. I'm going 2, and then I could go 3, 2, 1, 6, 5, 6, 1. So like how sweet. That might be like too much. It might be overkill for what you're doing, but I'm just showing this process, right? Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, right? And so that I'm just following through this pentatonic thing. So you can, even if you're just going from one note to the next, you can often fit some of these pentatonic patterns in really quickly. Like me, right? I'm just right? So that's one of those moments where we go 2, 3, 5, 5, like me, or you could just go like me, right? Yeah, you could do that, but like me, I once was lost, but now, right? I could just do that all day, right? It's like a practice. Anytime you go from 2 to 1, you could always fit that little slingshot thing in. And again, this is a very simple song, but you can do this in certain contexts, and it sounds really, really amazing for songs where you haven't done any riffs or runs in it yet, and you just have to practice sort of stitching them together in the rhythm, and making sure that you end up getting to the next note in your melody. It's all good. Hi, good to see you. So yeah, right now I'm just talking about it's a really slow process of understanding the pentatonic scale and the pattern. And now we're getting to this point where we're starting to see how we can apply it, and what that looks like. And again, you just practice doing it in these groups of 3 notes, and then eventually you can stitch it together into these groups of 5 notes or 7 notes. But start with the group of 3, because those are very, very useful. Again, just going like no, yeah. There's lots of songs, just like in the R&B world, where you just end with a little pentatonic riff wherever you end up. Yeah, like yeah, whoa, right? That one I'm going from 2, 1, 6. So my point is, for beginning singers, focus on going from one of these main chord tones to another chord tone. That's a little bit easier, and then it's more challenging when you go from like 2 to 6, for example, right? Yeah, whoa, if you're thinking in this context of the major scale, right? And we'll talk about when we do minor things. If we get to it and if people are feeling like, I got this is good. Um, so again, this practice is we want to first line up our numbers. So if you're dealing with a song, you want to figure out what are the numbers of your song, and that's going to help you actually riff better. And it's going to help you understand where you can do these kinds of pentatonic motions. Um, so first thing, like let's say I have a song, right? I'm doing Amazing Grace. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5, 6, 1. Okay, I've got the lay of the land. And then I might practice doing some of these 3-note riffs, right? So 1, 6, 5, no. And then I might just go up note by note, right? No. This is 2, 1, 6. No. Now, one thing I practice, as I sort of mentioned earlier, is okay. First, I do numbers, then I do it with syllables, and I try to think the numbers in my head, and then I might do staccato to make sure I really, really know. And this is kind of in that agility side of things. It just is like there's a certain confidence that comes when you don't have a lot of time to readjust, right? You can be like, no, right? Instead, no, ha, 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 ha. That's a really great practice, but you have to watch yourself and make sure you're actually getting to the spots. Check it out on a piano, use a teacher. So again, I might go like, no, ha, ha, 1, 6, 5, and then no, ha, ha, 2, 1, 6, ha, 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 3, 2, 1, ha, 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 ha. So that's a pattern I could practice. I could just go ha, 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 ha. Right. And then oftentimes again we slingshot back, right? So maybe ha 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 or ha ha ha. So yeah, that's I really, I recommend just be playful actually with the pentatonic pattern. And if you don't play piano, right, it's just a matter of starting with your note. I mean, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2, 1. So I sing through the major scale so you know where that gap is, and then just take it out. So 1, 2, 3, 5, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5. Just play one note. No, right? And I'm just kind of thinking about it, playing in my ear. But don't go faster than you can keep track of the gaps, right? Because that's where people tend to mess up is they just don't know where the gap is. And then we just get off the pattern and then you just out of tune all of a sudden, right? So if you can mind the gap and keep yourself tight on that, then you'll realize that like doesn't matter what key you're in, it's always the same kind of pattern. And this is true for all scales, but the pentatonic pattern is a very, very useful one when it comes to this kind of stuff, because again, it just sounds good in a lot of contexts. Okay, so like with particular songs that are out of the public domain, I have to be careful because I can't really do them without getting the rest of the video sort of canceled by algorithms, and they're good about it sometimes. So that would be something that I would talk through with someone on a lesson, or like because otherwise the second I start singing the melody and with the words and things like that, we start to run into some problems. So it is important to note, I know it's really frustrating for sure, but it's important to note that pentatonic patterns don't always work in every situation. There are certain songs where it sounds kind of weird and you actually want to use a diatonic run or use some of those scale degrees. And then, we won't get into this, but understanding the pentatonic scale helps you with the next step, which is adding in blues notes or extra sort of chromatic notes that give us that sort of bend. And then that gives us even more options to play with. And when you add in blues notes plus pentatonic, plus like different articulations and things like that, like sliding into a note, repeating notes, you can just fool people forever, right? And fool people as in like kind of mesmerize them with all these different options, because you could sometimes do the regular pentatonic or sometimes do like a blues note in between and do a little turnaround. speaking of that, we've been doing a lot of like uh, sort of three note end note riffs, right? Which is going like da 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 na, right? Or you could do them up or down. It just depends. Tends to be easier for people to do downward runs, so I would recommend starting with that before you practice sort of going up through your range. It's just like a slightly different feeling. Um, then we add in turnarounds, right? And then this adds like another level of complexity. So what is a turnaround with our riffs? If you're not used to this, we pick a note like two, and then we go up, and then we do our three note run. So like 2, 3, 2, 1. So we're just building off of it, really. So if I'm like, yeah, yeah, you could do the five note run. We're like, yeah, right? Or I could be like, yeah, whoa, right? And that's sounds really nice too, right? Whoa, whoa, yeah. So this is a good example of like when you're doing these turnarounds, you still have to be mindful of the gap, because if you go, yeah, you're gonna get in between, right? You have to make sure, okay, I know I'm on 6. Yeah, whoa, right? That can sometimes be really hard if your turnaround has a gap, right? So a lot of times people do the turnarounds where they have more stepwise motion, right? And then they do a gap as they kind of come back down. You don't have to, it's just harder, right? So if I'm like, yeah, whoa, right? Just kind of, it's like a more technically challenging. But if I'm doing something where I'm like, yeah, whoa, oh, right? So I'm just skipping around my pentatonic scale and all these different kinds of motions. And then when you're really doing a really cool riff, just be intentional about it. Be like, if I'm always doing the same kind of motion, trust me, you'll listen to songs and the riff might be just on 3, 2, 1 the entire time. It'll be like, yeah, no, whatever it is, like they're singing their line and like, whoa, together. Sometimes it's like how we repeat our notes, together, right? And doing things like that, it sounds like extra notes. Or I might, they might, maybe one phrase in one verse is yeah, and the other phrase it's yeah, right? And it does a turnaround instead of just that three note run. And that's enough. Trust me, when people are listening to things and you're not expecting it, that just sounds like a more intentional artist who is just not boring you with the same run. The second we kind of start to anticipate it, it loses its magic. So I think a lot of the times like runs are exciting when they're less expected, or things are building, and then all of a sudden, like this run comes out, and then one time it's one way, and then the next time you're thinking, oh, here comes the run, and they do a slightly different turnaround. You're like, oh, that was cool. That's often what's happening. Is it's the same notes, but the way that you come in, or you do a repeated note. Like you may be like, ha, ha, whoa, right? And just a little slide in, or anything like that. Like extra repeated notes. You know, they'll repeat it a couple of times over and over again. And so hopefully this is just kind of demystifying, because I think pentatonic patterns freak people out if you don't know the lay of the land, because again, it's just like this constantly alternating thing between these 5 different options, and you can just get really, really stuck as to where you are. I wish I could go through some of these like famous runs that people do, but they're often just these pattern of these kinds of sequences, right? It's like 3-note run, turn around, 3-note run, turn around, 3-note run, re-articulating a note, 3-note run, 5-note run, or something like that. And all of a sudden you're just like riffing up a storm, right? So again, I recommend like pick a key and just do this kind of a thing, right? So I'll just do like, okay, here's F, 1, 3, 5, 3, 1. Be like, yeah, whoa, oh, 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 right? And just kind of practice doing that, and then so in my brain, I'm aware of these 2 gaps on either side, right? 3, 2, 1, gap, 6, 5, 6, gap, 1, 1, 2, 3, gap, 5, 6, 5, whoa, oh, gap, oh, right? Again, the faster you go, sometimes it's hard to even perceive that gap, right? This is just how music works. But you as the singer have to make sure you remember where it is. Otherwise, you'll just get kind of lost. So is this making sense, everyone? Do you have questions? Because this is like a slightly, for just geared towards like people who are new to this. So I'm trying not to go too crazy, but this is the method, right? First, learn your major scale. So I'm going to do this again. I'm kind of walk through it as like our lightning round version. So our major scale in C here. You can switch the key again. This is a nice place to start for people. You could do this octave. You could do this octave if you're a higher voice singer. Anything in between, again, just pick what's comfortable for you first, right? And the key for any riffs and agility is lightness. So be light with your voice. Don't overly muscle it. So here we go. I'm just going to do my major scale first. So like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Get used to that first. Understand the features, right? 1, 2, 3, whole steps. This is also part of our pentatonic scale, right? 1, 2, 3, and then 3 to 4. Where these half steps are, right? That's where we change things for our pentatonic pattern. So 1, 2, 3, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's the difference between a pentatonic motion and a major motion, right? They're basically the same thing, right? It's just there's a gap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 5. And then 5, 6, 7, 8. 5, 6, 8. Right? That's going to be the difference. Take out 4, take out 7, and mind the gap. So that I would practice that. I'd be like 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1. Do it with numbers first. Check yourself with the online tuner, with the piano, with a teacher until you got that really down. Then do it without numbers, but think the numbers, right? So na 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 na. Get used to that. Do it from 1 to 8 like this first, and then you could practice doing different like 3-note runs from here. But I highly recommend actually the next sort of best thing to do is to practice a middle pentatonic position where we think of our 1 in the middle, we jump down to 5, and we go up to our 5, 6, 5 thing. You could just go forever, right? Like as the song escalates and you get to a climax, you might jump up to the next octave and do 3, 2, 1 up there, right? I'll show you what I mean. So let's say I'm here. This is where it gets technically a little more challenging, right? So I can go 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 6, 5, 6, 1. Thinking about that sort of end part on the bottom. And then you might be singing a melody here. No, no, no. Doing my pentatonic thing. And then I might get to the higher part of the song, be like, no, no, no. Be like, yeah, whoa. Right, do something up there. I'm like, oh, oh, and then kind of go all the way through things, right? So, yeah, yeah, oh, oh. And I'm just literally doing 3, 2, 1 up there, right, in this higher part of my range. Different technical considerations. That's pretty much it, right? It's actually not as crazy as people would think. Now, I'll end with this concept because I think it confuses people. So let's say I'm doing a pattern, like I'm doing this F major, F pentatonic. Now, these notes all can be done for a minor pattern, and we use the relative minor. So every key has a shared minor key that uses the same notes. So in this case, we have D minor is the relative minor. So it's always that 6th position. And if you think of that as your starting point, then all of a sudden you have a minor pattern, and you could flip-flop back and forth between the two, and this is where it gets really fun. It's just really about your focus is the kind of the thought here. So, and kind of what chords are playing underneath you. So again, if I'm like 3, 2, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 5, 3, 2, 1, 6, right? That's 6. If I think of this as 1, I'm keeping the same gaps. This is why the minor pentatonic, it sounds like the gaps are between different numbers because we're just using a different sort of orientation, but they're the same notes. So here, if I go 1, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 1. Now this is the same thing as me in F major going 3, 2, 1, 6, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 6. So some people are like, don't change the numbers, just keep it the same. Depends, right? Like if your song is just focused in minor and that's how you're thinking about the melody, then this is a better way of doing it. Going, instead of 6, I'm singing it as 1, 1, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 1. Whoa. And all of a sudden it sounds like more of like a blues kind of a pattern. No. Yo. But it's the same. They use the same exact notes, right? So in F, no, and then if I play the minor chord on top of it, whoa, it just sounds like it's different, right? And that's kind of, again, this is what's the power of the pentatonic pattern is I can easily switch between this major and minor feeling with the same exact notes. So just depends on what's happening underneath you. Now, this is what throws people off. You know, if I'm thinking about teaching the minor pentatonic, you think of it as this 6th scale degree. You know, if we're thinking of this as 1, just remember between 6 and 1, like in our F major, right? That's where the gap is. But if we're using this as 1, then all of a sudden it's between 1 and 3, right? It's just the way I'm thinking about it. It's different labels for the same notes. So that in that way, the minor pentatonic, we have 1, 3, 4, 5, 4, 3, 1, which is the same thing if I were thinking in major pentatonic in F, going 6, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 6. It's the same exact thing. It's just like, how am I sort of orienting myself? And that's really what throws people off, I think, in a lot of these musical situations. So hopefully that kind of demystifies some of that. So again, the minor pattern, we actually have a gap between 1 and 3, because in the minor pattern, think of it this way, right? 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. Between 2 and 3 is where we have that half step motion. So it's really the same concept. I'm taking away those half steps and instead replacing them with this minor third, because when we take that note out, we make a bigger gap. So 1, 3, 4, 5, and then this is where it's weird too. So in our minor sound, right, we have 5, 6, 5. That's really like this. That's in the major. That's like taking away 4. But in this case, because of where we're thinking of our context, it's our 6. It's the same thing though. I'm taking away that note and going 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 1, 7. Right. So this is it throws people off, but it's the same exact thing. I'm just giving it different labels because I'm thinking about it from this minor context, right? So 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 1, 7, 5, 4, 3, 1. So that can really throw you for a loop if you're using the numbers, or you could just feel it out like I talked about earlier, right? I could play it like this and be like, no, 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 no. Saying the same thing in this minor context. No, 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 no. And I just practice like, okay, what are these turnarounds? What feels good to me? And if you're someone who plays piano chords, practice going between the major 1 and the minor 6 and see how it just kind of changes your riffs and runs, because you'll feel sort of slightly different sort of push and pull. This also, like for one of you who was asking, like, why are the blues notes different? When I was teaching like like taking the major third and making minor third and talking about some of these spots. Uh, it's really the same thing. It's just again changing the labels. So like, if we're going like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, right? You put in this sort of blues note, yo, oh, oh. That in the minor, that's the third in this major context. In the minor context, 1, 3. You're gonna go 4, 4.5, 5. Whoa. Right. It's the same thing. It's the same note, just different sort of terminology. Whoa. Or no, no, no. Just depends on what's happening underneath it and the way that you're trying to interpret it. So the reason that's also confusing is because pentatonic pattern is ambiguous, right? It's because it has these gaps. You can kind of think of it in these different ways, right? And this works for the major and minor scale, but I think it just tends to be actually more disorienting when you have all these gaps. So that's my main thing: is mind the gap, practice out where those gaps are, and make sure you always know where they are, and then you can actually kind of just riff up a storm and do it rather intuitively. And if you find yourself falling out of the pattern, it's probably because you lost sort of sense of where the gap is. And so you just have to go and figure that out again. And so you don't have to think about this like in every context, because we want to just feel things as we sing a lot. And you start to memorize these kinds of licks that you can do, and you'll start to like intuitively know as you're singing a melody, oh, I could do that there. I can feel where that the possibility is because I've done this kind of practice. But again, like if you're running into problems, then go back and figure out where you are in that pattern. That's the power of any scale, right? Is it just orients you so you know what you're doing. And if you have trouble spots, like figure it out, map out that individual spot, and you've often fixed the problem. So hopefully that gives you a sense of it, and didn't go too far into sort of the advanced realm, although I put a little nugget of that at the very end here, right? So if you're super confused about it, just know that we'll keep doing more pentatonic practice, sometimes with more of a sort of an aim towards like the technique and like what is agility. In this case, we're talking about more like understanding the pattern itself. Both of those things help, but it's sort of a slightly different approach, right? From a theory standpoint, pitch matching standpoint, versus like my style and technique kind of standpoint, which we'll do at some point again. And that's where it gets a little harder for those of you who have seen some of these videos and been like, whoa, I can't handle the pentatonic. It's just because you have to do this first, get really comfortable, use this video, use any of our things on the website where we go over this pattern really slowly with some tools and resources. And then all of a sudden you're going to have all these options, and you're going to be able to keep up with the more complicated ones where we're really trying to like train ourselves with a pattern, so we can like just physically work it into our body so it becomes really automatic. If you're a blues singer and you do this kind of stuff, like eventually it just becomes like your muscle memory, right? That's just the way that you sing things, and that this is the path towards that. But I recommend like use some blues songs, check out some country music, right? Like that's where you're gonna see this really, really clearly. And you'll be like, wow, every single melody is pretty much like a pentatonic pattern, or at least most of the melody is a pentatonic pattern. If you're dealing with classical music, you're probably not gonna see this very often at all, which is kind of what's interesting, right? It's just sometimes the genre defines sort of the choices that we have, and then we have a slightly different technique that we're practicing. It's mainly just because we have different patterns that we're working with. So good. I'm glad you find that really valuable, even for someone like you who is following this all the time. Like I'm always like, go back to the basics. Like I could like again, I do this kind of like as I'm like shopping around or whatever, listening on the radio. I'm just kind of practicing those things. But it's really like you could do that. But now as I've done this more just intentionally, I can like see the numbers as I'm singing it. And that's the key to learning pieces, right? So if you're just starting out and you're working on country music, like doing this kind of practice, and you're all of a sudden going to be able to just understand how the piece is constructed, understand the melody just by hearing it. And that's really what I want to teach people because yes, we can, reading music is very, very important. Trust me. Like, I think that's an incredibly important skill for a professional, and for those who are interested, if you're working with other musicians. But there's often a lot of contexts where we're just looking at a lead sheet or we're trying to learn something by ear. A lot of pop songs don't have necessarily like quality music written out. Sometimes it looks kind of weird and it's not really how they created the piece. And so if you read it like exactly, it sounds kind of like robotic, right? Um, and it often looks harder because of the way the rhythm is. So a lot of the times people are trying to notate these little runs and it just looks really funny. And if you understand it as more of this concept of like a stylistic addition, then you'll just see the simple melody and then understand, oh, that person's just riffing right there off of the pentatonic pattern. Then you don't have to read it like that. And so actually, I find that these kinds of skills help me read faster if I can know the context. And then I don't have to like I don't have to get so stuck on trying to get this perfection. I can just understand that the musician was using pentatonic riffing, and then I could kind of come up with my own and make it in my own sort of unique sound. And you'll see this all over the place online, right? Like people taking famous songs, finding their own little riff patterns that are slightly different. And that's one of the ways that you make something your own is by understanding this concept. So pentatonic scales, great for pitch matching, uh, really, really great for improvising and skills that free you from the page a little bit and get you feeling it out a little bit more. So some singers are like that, and some singers are really focused on the page. And I recommend that if you're the kind of singer who just does it intuitively, work on these scale degree things. If you're the kind of singer who's really stuck on uh, having to read something exactly and feeling trapped in that, that's going to really hold you back in a lot of contemporary situations. Work on the scale degrees and try to do it by ear, right? So we're working on this sort of tonal memory practice. And really the best way to do it is just to stumble and fall, make a bunch of mistakes. Wherever you make a mistake, figure out what that mistake is, and you'll realize you're probably making the same mistake in every single song. It's always that sixth scale degree that you're not quite hearing, and it's just going to open up so many doors. And I remember again being like a musician who worked with like reading music a lot in sort of the classical realm. It can hold you back from your improvisational skills, which are really, really fun and is sort of an exciting thing to practice. And just know that improvisation is this practice, learning licks, learning these patterns backwards and forwards until you just know all the options. And then it's just like picking which ones you fancy in the moment, and jumping around and feeling it out. But you have that confidence that you actually have been through all the patterns. So that's the mystery solved. Um, so yeah, I'm glad this is really helpful. I look forward to our next live streams. And I know that I think Camille's going to be back in action soon. So we'll be doing that tag team back and forth again, which is going to be really exciting because we have slightly different approaches to things. But hopefully, as you're following this, you can see the common threads, and understand the concepts from multiple approaches, right? I think that's a really important thing is to hear this explained by different teachers, because eventually it's going to really click, especially as you have just these multiple angles of thinking about it. And people have different strategies for getting technical mastery of it. So thanks again for watching, and I will catch you all when I see you next. All right, take care.